Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Dion. I am the nutrition consultant here at Choices Markets in Abbotsford. And welcome to our event, Brain Health, Mood, and the Inflammation Connection. So it is my absolute pleasure to introduce our guest speaker tonight. I'm just going to read her bio here. Dr. Kate Rhéaume is a graduate and former faculty member of the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. Dr. Kate speaks internationally on many topics related to health and wellness. She is the author of the best-selling book, Vitamin K2 and the Calcium Paradox, How a Little Known Vitamin Can Save Your Life. So before I hand it over to her, I'm just going to go over a couple of housekeeping items. After the event, you will be sent a survey. This will come to you by email, and we will ask you for your physical mailing address. If you fill that out, we will send you one of these by mail. So this is a nutrition buck, as we call it. That's $10 off if you spend $50 or more at any Choices location, and that includes on top of sale items. If you would like to ask questions, you can do that, but you'll have to do it through the YouTube live chat. So you can pop those questions in as we go, and we'll get to them at the end. In order to do that, you will need to have a YouTube account. So sign into your YouTube account now, or you can quickly sign up for one and then you can ask questions. For future events, you can find out about that at posters around our locations and also on our website at choicesmarkets.com. So with that, I am going to open it up and hand it over to you, Dr. Kate. Welcome.
Thanks, Dion. All right, good evening, everyone. Delighted that you could be here to take steps to be proactive about improving your own health. And this is certainly a topic that's near and dear to my heart because my dad had Alzheimer's, and that motivated me to learn everything I could about brain health. And it is something that drives me on a daily basis to live, I guess you could say, a brain healthy lifestyle, or do whatever I can to minimize my risk of going down that road. Of course, Alzheimer's and dementia aren't the only concerns that we may have about our brains and our brain health. There's a range of those. And so we'll be talking about everything I mentioned tonight will apply to brain health in general. And I hope that you find it practical, useful information, hopefully something new. And it covers a wide variety of brain health concerns. And now my slides aren't working the way they were before. Okay, try like this. All right, so we'll be talking about brain health, mood, and the inflammation connection. Now that is potentially a huge amount of information to cover. Of course, I'm going to distill it down into the most, like I said, practical, useful information. So you have some meaningful tips, takeaway hacks even that make a difference. And Dion did a great job of already introducing me, but that's a cover shot of my book. And what we're going to focus on tonight is looking at factors that contribute to healthy brain, as well as those that contribute to decline in specifically cognitive health. And so in other words, the good stuff and the not good stuff, what we do that helps and hurts. How to create and maintain a healthy foundation as we enter, well, really at any stage of life, you can start thinking about your brain health, as well as how to feed our brains, promoting healthy cognition, and to how to use natural health products, in particular, how we can, say, take advantage of individual nutrients or even plant-based medicines that support our cognitive health. So let's just sort of look at the big picture of our brains, what they are. It's almost hard to grasp these amazing organs. Oops, that was odd. My slide just moved by itself when I put my water down on the table. The brain weighs 3 pounds, but it uses 20 to 30% of the oxygen that comes into our body. And it's encased by a skull that's very thin, thickness of 3 pennies, which is why a lot of people I know join this kind of presentation because they're concerned about concussion or post-traumatic brain injury, but specifically concussion I know is a big concern. And although I won't be narrowing specifically on concussion, certainly a lot of what I'm going to talk about in general about brain health will apply to that. And the brain, by the way, isn't fully developed until we're about 25 years old. And so that speaks to the fact that, it really is never too early to start thinking about your brain health, because there's things we can do to our brains early in life that make an impact later. There are 100 billion cells in the brain. Most of these are neurons, nerve cells. There are some other cells, and by neurons, it means cells that communicate with one another and really do what we think about when we think about brain. There's, of course, cells that act as protectors, like casing around those cells, thinking about, for example, the insulation around an electrical wire. Those other cells aren't transmitting messages, but they're important to protect the cells that are. There are also cells that monitor the health of what's going on in the brain, blood sugar levels, for example. But most of the 100 billion cells in there are neurons. And these will emit neurotransmitters. So these are chemical messengers that pass from one cell to the other. This is by and large how cells communicate with one another and are responsible for the cell's actions. And the most exciting thing I think I have to share with you is, the brain used to be something of a black box. We really didn't know what was going on in there. And we still probably only know about, at best, maybe 10%. But I think people used to think that once you lost your brain cells, and as life went on, those cells did decline, and too bad, so sad. But actually, we now know that you can grow new brain cells throughout your life at any stage. Sounds incredible, sounds impossible, but it's true, and it's not that complicated. And I'll share with you a few tips on how to do that. So cognitive decline is the main focus of what we're going to be talking about. And this is a deterioration in cognitive function. And that can happen due to injury to the brain, as I already mentioned, concussion. I know a lot of people are concerned about that. And it can lead to personality changes, impaired reasoning, difficulty concentrating, focusing. When we look at dementia, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form of age-related dementia, but there's also non-Alzheimer's type dementias, other types of dementia. There's also something called mild cognitive impairment, which is typically as well associated with the aging process. Our brain maybe isn't as sharp as it used to be, or we feel like we're being forgetful. And to a certain extent, some of that can be normal, or at least very common with the aging process. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have a dementia per se. But it's not fun to feel like your brain isn't as sharp, or your memory isn't as sharp as it once was. In terms of dementia, and I mention this because I know a lot of people are concerned about this, as I am, given my family history. More than 100,000 Canadians are diagnosed with dementia every year. That's one person every 5 minutes. And it, as I mentioned, is a leading cause of dementia. 63% of all dementias are Alzheimer's type. And 72% of Alzheimer's cases are women. So for women, it is something to be cognizant of, to be proactive about your brain health. Now, there's a lot of information on this slide because there are lots of things that can cause memory problems, not just dementia. So in other words, if you're feeling forgetful, there may be lots of reasons for that. First of all, I'd like to say that if you walk into the kitchen and forget why you went there, that is not a sign of your impending dementia or any even mild cognitive impairment. That happens to all of us. And it turns out that, if you haven't heard already, they've done psychological testing that shows that walking through a doorway causes you to forget things. So it's perfectly normal. It even happens to kids. I've seen it happen to my kids, which makes me feel a lot better, because I think when that happens, we think, oh no, here we go, the slippery slope, it's starting. But actually, walking through a doorway causes you to forget things. As long as when you go back to where you started, you remember what it was, then that's nothing to be concerned about. But there are lots of other things that cause true memory problems. And the point of having this big list is that I won't be able to get to all of them tonight. And these include things like stress. When we're under stress, cortisol levels cause a shrinking of the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain, same part of the brain that's affected in Alzheimer's, for short-term memory, making new memories, or remembering what happened a few minutes ago. When you're stressed, your brain is in fight or flight mode, not remembering mode. Digestive disorders. This has to do with a problem with the gut-brain connection. Insomnia. We all know lack of sleep can lead us to be forgetful. Thyroid disorders as well. Nutritional deficiencies. Essential fatty acids is one. Vitamin B12 is another one. One of the early signs, as I'll mention later, of B12 deficiency is simply being forgetful. Impaired blood flow to the brain, obviously. This is why people traditionally have taken ginkgo for memory, to improve blood flow to the brain. And naturally, neuron loss due to subclinical brain damage. There can be lots of reasons for that. Mild concussion, loss of blood flow. Hormone changes, menopause and andropause are well known to be associated with memory losses. Now, those tend to be transient and temporary. So if you're worried about your memory and going through menopause, don't worry, it will come back. Blood sugar imbalances can definitely interrupt your cognitive function. Mood disorders as well. Polypharmacy, in other words, taking lots of different pharmaceutical medications. If you're worried about your memory and taking lots of prescription medications, check with your pharmacist about whether the combinations may be affecting the way your brain functions. Protein accumulation, plaques, tangles. Now, these are typically associated with a specific types of dementia like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, but those can be accumulating and happening before you have a diagnosis of those conditions. Mitochondrial degeneration. This is something we're going to focus on because it's so important. The mitochondria are the essentially batteries to our cells. And if the batteries wear down, your brain cells, like any other cell in the body, isn't getting enough energy. As well as excessive inflammation in the brain, as the topic title suggests. We're going to focus on that tonight. So we will look at, as I mentioned, inflammation. Really going to be focusing here because it is an area where we realize in both short-term and long-term really impacts brain health. So for example, I've mentioned concussion a few times. That wasn't going to be a big focus of our talk tonight, but ultimately what happens with concussion, when there's a head injury, there's inflammation that happens. And the damage that occurs with concussion is mediated by that inflammation. And so, in fact, one of the key things to be done with inflammation is if you can get it, with concussion, if you can get inflammation down quickly, you can minimize the damage that occurs due to that brain injury. But in addition to that obvious form of inflammation, any inflammation that happens in the body can potentially cross into the brain, leading to inflammation in the brain. And what's tricky is that when we tend to think of inflammation, we think of painful things, right? Itises, arthritis, bursitis, those kinds of things. But inflammation in the brain is typically painless. So it's silent inflammation, something that can be happening without us being aware of it. And so I'm going to talk about how we can minimize that. Okay, so what are some of the major causes of inflammation? Poor diet, that's a very general statement. Specifically when it comes to poor diet, it means poor quality fats, too much of the inflammatory omega-6 essential fatty acids, not enough of the omega-3s, I'll get to that later. Elevated blood sugar is probably, I don't know, it's tough call between that and the fats, but possibly the single most important nutritional factor in your brain health. Dementias, Alzheimer in particular, has been called type 3 diabetes. The brain needs glucose for sure. It runs on it and functions on it, but it's really sensitive to excess glucose. That can be really damaging. Insulin resistance, also known as diabetes, not surprisingly, diabetics have a higher rate of dementia, but even among non-diabetics, those people with higher blood sugar levels have more problems with their brains. Oxidized LDL. So we talk about LDL being so-called bad cholesterol. HDL is good cholesterol, LDL is bad cholesterol, but really LDL is not bad until it becomes oxidized. So a lack of antioxidants is a big factor that plays into that. Lack of exercise, extremely important. Being sedentary is not good for anything, and it's really not good for your brain. Conversely, exercise is extremely helpful for your brain, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Lack of sleep, as we already mentioned, will impair your memory and also lead to inflammation. And being sedentary, by the way, absolutely will promote inflammation in the body. That's counterintuitive. You think, how can you be creating inflammation by doing nothing, just sitting there? But in fact, that's exactly what happens because our bodies are designed to move. Smoking, obviously, it's a no-brainer. Excess stress also generates inflammation and environmental toxins. So, interestingly, there is a pathway that is relatively recently discovered that allows immune cells and inflammatory messengers to enter and exit our central nervous system and our brain. This is pretty new information. We didn't know that this essentially circulatory system for the immune system existed in this way and reached the brain in the way it did. So a research team found that just one episode of systemic inflammation could be sufficient to trigger rapid decline in neurological function. And so things that challenge our immune system, for example, can have this effect in anything that leads to inflammation in the system. All right, so let's look at some brain health basics. I mean, we talked about, I talked about types of things that cause or promote inflammation, which is really bad for the brain. And so obviously anything we can do to minimize that, it would be helpful. So in terms of lifestyle and diet, limiting exposure to toxins. That seems like an obvious one, and we don't necessarily have control over the air we breathe, depending on where you live in the country. Fortunately, in Canada, we in most places live with fairly clean air. I know that depends on the time of year and whether you're breathing in smoky air, but whatever is under our control. So for example, eating organic food reduces your intake of pesticide, or reducing your exposure to smelly things, fragrances, air fresheners, stuff that you add to your laundry that's just perfumes, fragranced body care products, limiting exposure to these, as some of these substances will cross the blood-brain barrier and get into the brain. And then following an anti-inflammatory / Mediterranean diet, I will get into more specifics on that. Stress management, again, we could do a whole webinar on it, but looking at your workload, triggers, stress triggers, obviously things like deep breathing and getting adequate sleep help to counteract stress. So those are helpful in and of themselves, but they're also helpful because they help us counteract stress. And then hormone and neurotransmitter balancing. So balancing blood sugar, like I said, nutritionally, that arguably the single most important thing, although healthy fats are very important too. It's a real toss-up between those. And balancing neurotransmitters, which in fact, everything we've already mentioned will help do that. And I'll touch on a few more things as we go along. So the importance of water, as I sip away here. Water is absolutely critical for optimal brain function. And at age 80, we have 15% less water in our body than at age 20. We just gradually dry up with age. That is very common and normal. There's several reasons for that. As well as people get older, they do tend to take more medications, and many common medications contribute to dehydration. So you can see a graphic here of a normal brain on the left and a dehydrated brain on the right. See all those spaces? It's almost literally shrunken or dried up like a raisin. And this is not dissimilar, this image on the right of the severely dehydrated brain, to what you see in various forms of dementia, and this shrinking of overall brain volume, for example. And so staying hydrated, if you don't love water, then, you know, put something in it, like whether it's a squeeze of lemon or your cucumbers, some bone broth, for example, as a switch it up, and a pinch of salt in your water. So you are helping to replace electrolytes, and it's more hydrating than just plain water on its own. Okay, the importance of diet. I have sort of touched on this and around this. I already mentioned that high blood sugar is one of the most harmful things for our brain health. And so avoiding high glycemic index foods, the white flours, white sugars, is, you know, arguably up there with the most important things we can do, as well as making sure we have healthy fats in the diet, as I mentioned, less omega-3s, less omega-6s, more omega-3s. And studies have shown that the Mediterranean diet may help prevent brain shrinking that happens over time and help to preserve cognition in the elderly. Now, there's a number of factors in the Mediterranean diet that may help with its ability to lower the risk of dementia. We know that it has cardiovascular benefits. We know that it's absolutely anti-inflammatory due to the levels, for example, high levels of olive oil, as well as high fiber foods, lots of antioxidants in this diet. And this emphasizes fruits, vegetables, healthy fats, fish, whole grains, and moderate amounts of meat. So if we look at this graphic, this helps give us a sort of a good big picture look at diet and lifestyle contributors for a healthy brain and ones that predispose to dementia, particularly Alzheimer's. So the healthy brain, we want to increase, BDNF is brain-derived neuronal growth factor, so nerve growth factor, decrease inflammation, and increase insulin sensitivity. So we want to have more monounsaturated fatty acids. We want to have omega-3s and 6s, but in the North American diet, omega-6, like from corn oil, seed oils, are already overrepresented. Exercise, extremely important, and a wide variety of antioxidants, because another thing that affects our brain over time is free radical damage. And so like simple carbohydrates, sitting around not being active, and the typical Western diet, which is high in sugar, omega-6 fats, especially ones cooked at high temperatures, and generally not nutrient dense and rather bereft of nutrients. So exercise, I have mentioned a few times, and this is probably the single biggest motivator for me to stay active because I know the importance of this for brain health. And exercise can literally lead to a younger brain, and this is at all stages of life. For example, moderate exercise at midlife is associated with almost a 40% reduction in developing cognitive impairment later in life. So in other words, it's never too soon to start. And people with lower fitness levels, conversely, experience faster deterioration in the brain, white matter, as well as cognitive function. Conversely, exercising is associated with slower deterioration of the hippocampus. Again, that's the part of the brain that gets attacked in Alzheimer's disease. And regular exercise has shown a 47% improvement in memory scores after just 1 year compared to people engaging in stretching only. And exercise has literally been shown to grow new brain cells. So in other words, exercise can make your brain bigger and fatter. It helps to increase a factor that will stimulate the growth of new neurons. And so this is one way that you can grow new brain cells. And this happens at any age. So they have done studies, particularly in Italy, of centenarians, so people only 100 years of age and older, still showing that exercise at any age can help improve your brain function. Okay, next, stress. Stress, we know, impacts our brain and more. Research suggests that up to 90% of all disease is stress-related, which is pretty mind-blowing. But specifically when it comes to cognitive function, I already mentioned that high stress levels will cause a shrinking of the hippocampus. That's the memory centers of the brain, one of the memory centers. Conversely, it will cause an increase in the areas of the brain, not surprisingly, associated with worry and anxiety, the amygdala. And so anything we can do to decrease our stress levels is helpful for our brain function, both over the short and long term. And yes, studies have shown that meditation, for example, will increase the volume of the hippocampus and decrease the volume of the amygdala, which is the stress and fear center of the brain. And so that is amazing. What's more amazing is that perception also makes a big impact. So even among people who are equally highly stressed, then those people who perceive their stress as a challenge do better than those who perceive their stress as a threat. Okay, so let's get on to nootropics. So nootropics is a term that refers to, well, it's a whole category of drugs. Basically, anything that makes your brain work better is a nootropic. So this can be smart drugs, memory enhancers, neuroenhancers, cognitive enhancers, in the form of some are pharmaceutical medications, some are supplements, nutraceuticals, specific individual nutrients, or functional foods that improve cognitive function. So nootropics, if you haven't heard the term before, it is a buzzword in certain circles, and that's any, I guess you could say, ingredient or compound that makes your brain work better. So we are going to talk about some nootropics sort of work on a foundational level to improve cognitive function, but you may not necessarily notice from one moment to the next, where there's other nootropics that you will feel the difference pretty quickly. But I want to talk about a foundational one, which I've touched on a few times, and that's healthy fats. Your brain is 60% fat by weight, by dry weight. In other words, once you take the water out of your brain, what's left is 60% fat. So you literally are what you eat, or your brain is what you eat when it comes to fat. Omega-3s are healthy unsaturated fats that are really brain beneficial. There's two main types of omega-3s. DHA and EPA. These are both critically important for your brain health. DHA is required for, I guess you could say, like the nuts and bolts mechanics of brain health. For example, studies show that athletes who have higher levels of DHA, football players in particular, suffer less damage through playing their sport and head impact and trauma when they already have high levels of DHA in the blood versus those who don't. So it's almost like a cushion that happens on the inside. Conversely, EPA is important for mood. So we need both of those things for our brain to work properly. And now omega-6s, as I've already mentioned and knocked a few times, these are the vegetable oils, so-called vegetable oils. They're really seed oils coming from things like canola, sunflower, safflower, and those are typically very high in the North American diet. They're pro-inflammatory, and so something that, not surprisingly, isn't great for our brain health. Higher intake of processed vegetable oils are associated with poor brain health. Conversely, omega-3 fatty acids, there's a ton of research. I tried to keep it to a few key points, but there's really so much interesting research about the benefits of omega-3s for your brain health. Arguably, if you were going to take one supplement for your brain, it would be an omega-3 supplement. As I mentioned, fat makes up 60% of the brain. 40% of the brain is in the fat that's there is in the form of DHA, although they're both important for cognition, memory, and mood. And the ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s influences brain cell signal transmission. In other words, think of these fats as the insulation along an electrical wire. And the thicker and healthier that insulation is, the faster the electricity is going to pass through the wire. Conversely, low levels of essential fatty acids are associated with increased risk of all kinds of dementia, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So supplementing with omega-3, even for people who already have Alzheimer's, has been shown to lead to improvements in mood, cooperation, appetite, ability to navigate around the home, short-term memory, and all kinds of other things. And so if it can already show improvements in those individuals, you could imagine that it's also helpful for a healthy brain. So the question here is, actually, before I get onto this, where do we get these healthy fats from? So omega-3s are found in two major sources. There are plant-based and animal-based. Plant-based omega-3s come from things like flaxseed, hemp seed, but they're short-chain omega-3s, and the body has to connect those together to make the long-chain omega-3s that we actually use. Conversely, the animal-based forms coming from grass-fed animal foods or deep cold water fish is the best known, are long-chain omega-3s that go directly and are used in that form in the brain. But eating fish every day is problematic, especially with the larger fish. If you're eating small fish, sardines and anchovies, you could probably get away safely with eating them on a daily basis. But larger fish, things like salmon, mackerel, unfortunately, even if they're wild caught, they have environmental contaminants and shouldn't be consumed on a daily basis. So this is where a good quality omega-3 essential fatty acid supplement comes in. These fats coming from deep cold water fish, they have the omega-3s that you're looking for, EPA and DHA, but they've been processed in a way to remove the environmental contaminants. Quality makes a huge difference when it comes to fish oil, that your fish oil is pure and potent and not oxidized. In other words, the fats haven't been damaged. And like I said, if you're considering taking one thing for your brain health, I don't think that there's any better one single thing that you can take other than a good quality fish oil supplement. They have also come a long way in terms of flavor and taste. So Sealicious, for example, is a line of high quality natural triglyceride fish oils sourced from sardines and anchovies and mackerel, but also starting with small fish and then purified, but flavored with all natural fruit flavors. Each single teaspoon provides 750 milligrams of EPA and 500 milligrams of DHA. So for most people, in the summertime, I would say 1 teaspoon is a healthy dose. You need more in the winter, so doubling that up. And if you're really concerned about brain health and think you might need or benefit from more, then you can speak to your healthcare practitioner. These are sweetened with monk fruit, so they're sugar-free and tested for their purity and potency. And they are, they're tasty. So when something's tasty, remember to take it. Okay, so moving right along to mitochondria. I mentioned that I was going to spend a little bit of time on this because it's something that's important and I think maybe underappreciated. Mitochondria, as you may have heard, are the energy-producing cells in all, energy-producing centers in all of our cells. They're essentially like the batteries in each of our cells. Every cell, almost every cell in the body has mitochondria because almost every cell needs energy. But some cells have more than others. And so your average cell will have about 2,500 mitochondria in it, in one cell. But very energy hungry cells like brain cells can have 100,000 or more mitochondria because brain cells are always working. They never rest. Even when you're sleeping, they're still doing something. The brain is an extremely energy hungry organ. It has very mitochondrial rich tissue. And if those start to decline, then your brain cells are simply lacking energy, and anything that lacks energy isn't going to work as well. And so a major factor in aging and age-related cognitive decline is either a degeneration of or loss of mitochondria. So the mitochondria are declining in either their quantity or quality or both. So what are certain nutrients? Now there's things I already mentioned, cutting your stress and exercising are important for mitochondrial health, but there are certain key nutrients, some of which you're probably already aware of. I mentioned coenzyme Q10 because I think most people are already aware of this nutrient. And they may even be aware that it has something to do with mitochondrial function. You'd be absolutely right. It's the primary antioxidant that supports and protects mitochondria. It's also intimately involved in energy production within the mitochondria. There's electrons bouncing around. CoQ10 will help to throw them and catch them as they pass down a chain to create energy. And so I mentioned CoQ10 because most people are familiar with that. Now there's another nutrient in the same family as CoQ10. In other words, it has a very similar structure, but it's different, and you may not have heard of it, which is Pyrroloquinoline Quinone. That's quite a mouthful, which is why we just call this PQQ. And PQQ, although it looks a lot like, it's a quinone, like ubiquinone or CoQ10, it does something that CoQ10 doesn't and can't. And not to say that we need one or the other, but the point is that most people haven't heard of PQQ, and it does something pretty amazing. This is a nutrient that is available in tiny amounts in almost every food, which is pretty cool and mind-boggling to think of a nutrient. There are not many nutrients that you find in almost every food, which speaks, I think, to its importance, but still it's in quite minute amounts. And what it does is that it helps us generate new mitochondria, mitochondrial biogenesis. So replacing the batteries, essentially, when the batteries start to wear down, we have cellular mechanisms to replace them, and PQQ gets that to happen and stimulates that. And as a consequence, it will also increase the production of nerve growth factor, so helping to stimulate the growth of new nerves, new neurons, new brain cells. So this is a nutrient that helps to do that. It has neuroprotective properties. It's also an antioxidant. It has a number of benefits for mitochondrial function. There have been clinical trials for adults using this, people who had mild memory concerns, and showing improvements in their memory and cognitive function, taking it on a daily basis for 3 months. So like I said, although it's available in tiny amounts in all kinds of foods, clinical trials have used 20 milligrams of PQQ and shown these improvements in memory and cognitive function. So PQQ is available in a supplemental form. BioPQQ, this product or ingredient comes from Japan, and it's the only clinically tested, naturally occurring pyrroloquinoline quinone that helps to, which has been shown to help support the formation of new mitochondria, enhance cognitive performance, including memory and attention, protecting neurons from injury and degradation, as well as, of course, supporting the body's energy production, because you aren't just targeting mitochondria in the brain, but mitochondria all over the body. So if you are considering or concerned about your brain's cognitive function or performance, then PQQ is definitely a nutrient to consider, and I would absolutely consider this a nootropic. Okay, next I'm going to mention a nutrient that vitamin B12 plays a critical role in neurological function. And if you're low in B12, one of the first signs of that I already mentioned is forgetfulness and clumsiness. And I mention this because not everybody is deficient in B12. And if you're not deficient in B12, taking B12 won't increase your brain function. However, if you are deficient in vitamin B12 and you take B12 and get your levels back up to normal, it can make quite an important and meaningful difference in your cognitive function. And so, like I said, this won't apply to everybody, but enough people out there are deficient in B12, and for those people, this will make a difference. So who can be deficient in B12? Well, anybody following a vegan or vegetarian diet is at higher risk of being deficient in B12. People taking certain medications, metformin is a very common medication, for example, that lowers B12 levels. And then as we age, absorption of B12 can become more difficult. People as well may have smaller appetites or be eating less meat, so they're getting in less B12. So ideally, if you can have your B12 levels tested at some point, maybe B12 is safe to take regardless of whether you know what your levels are, but specifically if you're at the low end of normal, so even when it's not showing abnormal, but in the lower third of the normal range, that level of B12, even though it's not being marked as a deficiency or it's not being flagged, can be associated with forgetfulness. So B12 has this really important role in the normal functioning of the brain and entire nervous system, and it also may help prevent brain atrophy, loss of brain cells, and the active form of B12 is something called methylcobalamin, and that is something that you would find in, well, here are foods here that are high in vitamin B12, fan favorites like liver, as well as other types of meat and seafood and cheese. You can get small amounts of B12. There aren't really any very good plant sources. I do believe brewer's yeast and possibly maybe blue-green algae. But the point is, following a vegan diet, really tough to get B12. And I would just automatically supplement with B12. For anybody else, like I said, not harmful to supplement with it, but at some point, nice to get a test to see where you're at, whether or not that may be contributing to your cognitive function. So you may have heard of B12 shots, sublingual, these type of quick dissolve methylcobalamin sublingual tablets dissolves right into the tongue. The B12 goes right into the bloodstream. They work as well as B12 shots. And so this is something to consider. And like I said, if you're low in B12, this can make a difference in your memory and how your brain works. All right, curcumin. This is a hot topic still, as ever, and one around which there's always lots of misinformation. But I bring it up here because, there's a lot of research around curcumin, and it is well known to be, one of the best natural, if not arguably the best natural anti-inflammatory. And just on that alone suggests it may be helpful for brain health. We know that curcumin, once it's absorbed, which is the tricky part that I'll get to, but once you can absorb it through the intestines, it will cross the blood-brain barrier and exert its anti-inflammatory effects in the brain. And so this is something I take on a regular basis just because of my history, a family history of Alzheimer's, wanting to protect my brain, keeping inflammation down. You can't beat curcumin for that. Now, curcumin is something that in its natural form is not very well absorbed. So this image here with these big lumpy molecules, that's curcumin in its natural state, are fairly large, irregular, like I said, not easily absorbed molecules. And so absorption and bioavailability of regular curcumin is quite poor. And all of the clinical trials of curcumin that show any decent results are using enhanced absorption forms. So for example, Theracurmin is a novel form of curcumin with high bioavailability. They take the curcumin particle here and grind it down to teensy tiny particle that you would see on the right, these little specks. Another way of looking at it is a standard curcumin, due to the surface tension of water, will just kind of sit on water and then eventually fall down on the bottom in a clump. With the tiny, tiny particles of Theracurmin, it doesn't dissolve in water, it's still fat soluble, but the particles are so small that they will weave their way in between the water molecules. And for that reason, it has very high absorption and high bioavailability. So Theracurmin is the most number of published clinical trials of any form of curcumin on the market. And this is what you want. Bioavailability is a good thing, but ultimately you need to see the clinical trials to show if that's leading to any meaningful results. Specifically, when it comes to brain health, a long-term study, and by what's long-term in the brain health research is 18 months, so really not that long, but has shown improvements in memory, attention functions, as well as decreased compared to the people that weren't taking it. So we had a treatment group taking Theracurmin, control group taking a placebo, and at the end of the 18 months, the people taking Theracurmin had fewer plaques and tangles, those are areas of abnormal brain protein deposits, compared to those not taking it. And so that is really important if you are concerned about dementia, and specifically about Alzheimer's, but as well Parkinson's. And we want to keep those plaques and tangles out of the brain. But also, Of course, Theracurmin is known as an anti-inflammatory, so people take it for joint health, any kind of itis, cardiovascular health, lots of different types of research around it, but I'm just focusing on the brain health studies. So the curcumin-rich double-strength, this is Theracurmin, this tiny particle form of curcumin that's highly bioavailable, 100 times smaller than crude or unprocessed curcumin, and it is then highly bioavailable, leading to a high blood level. So again, better known as an anti-inflammatory, people taking it for joint health, but absolutely for that very same reason, it's wonderful for brain health, also very powerful antioxidant. By the way, when I said there's lots of myth around curcumin, single biggest myth when it comes to curcumin is that you need black pepper to absorb it. I do a show of hands, but I'm sure everybody would have their hand up that you've heard that. It was based on a really small study done in the 90s when they figured out that curcumin is potentially really helpful, but people weren't absorbing it, even large amounts weren't absorbing, and they were like, what can we do to make it more absorbed? And they added one study where they added black pepper to the curcumin, and they found that the blood levels went from pretty much undetectable to just barely detectable, like from 0.1 to 0.4. And they said, well, that's a 400% increase in the absorption of curcumin, but 400% times nothing is still basically nothing. So unfortunately, if you feel strongly about it and you want to, grind some black pepper on your food, or when you have your curcumin rich, that's fine. But unfortunately, it's not, black pepper doesn't really make a whole lot of difference in the absorption of curcumin. Okay, one more thing that I want to share with you that is a true, I would say, nootropic combination is from this line, Three Brains, which, as the name would imply, focused on brain health. There's a lot of wonderful products in the line, but specifically I highlight and single out this one because it has a really powerful combination of brain enhancing nutrients, of nootropics that work in through a variety of different mechanisms. So particularly it contains acetyl L-carnitine. This is a nutrient, an amino acid, sometimes we call it the fat bus. It will take fatty acids and drive them into the mitochondria where they can be burned for energy. So it helps to feed the mitochondria to generate energy. It's also a nutrient that has been associated with brain health, cognitive function studies, as well studies on people 100 years of age and older using acetyl L-carnitine. It's pretty amazing. N-acetylcysteine, alpha-lipoic acid, ginkgo, I mentioned that earlier, from microcirculation, so you're delivering the nutrients to the brain. Phosphatidylserine, as well as vinpocetine and huperzine A. Phosphatidylserine is a healthy fat that is found in, or should be found in the membranes of healthy brain cells, but it can decrease with age. And when that happens, the brain cells, if their membranes aren't healthy, they don't communicate as well as they should. They can't transmit those neurotransmitters. So phosphatidylserine is helpful for that. So each of these nutrients individually have been studied and shown clinically to have a benefit for cognitive function. But the Three Brains Memory Boost helps to combine them in a way, or it's a combination that is unique on the market. So this is one that has been shown to help enhance memory and cognitive function, promote mental sharpness and concentration at any age, by the way. So great thing to take if you're studying for a test or you're just feeling like foggy-headed, not focused. Helps to support healthy blood flow and peripheral circulation. So peripheral circulation as well as central to the brain. Provides key antioxidants to protect delicate brain cells from free radical damage, and helps to preserve cognition for age-related cognitive decline, as well as, like I said, a great study aid. Okay, so to summarize, staying hydrated, anti-inflammatory diet, in other words, keeping sugar down, keeping healthy fats up and unhealthy fats down, and getting adequate sleep. omega-3 essential fatty acids, vitamin B12 if you think you're at risk of being low in B12, or if you've had a test to suggest that you are, or simply if you might be. Bio-PQQ, the Pyrroloquinoline Quinone, to help to replace the batteries in your brain cells. Stress management and exercise, absolutely, there's nothing that replaces exercise. It can help you grow new brain cells, as well as curcumin rich to deal with free radicals and inflammation in the brain. One question I get asked, you'll see there's a lot of several different brands being shown. And the one thing that all these brands have in common is that they're tested by iSure, which is a third-party testing facility based in British Columbia that will do quality control testing above and beyond even the strict Canadian guidelines to ensure that all the products are, first of all, non-GMO, but as well, the mass spec here refers to contaminants testing that is, at this point, 700 different contaminants. And again, that's not a Health Canada requirement, but it is something that can be done. And so in my books, it should be done if it can be done. So to make sure you are getting exactly what it says on the label and nothing else, no surprises, or nothing that you wouldn't want in there. So looking for the iSure on labels is one way to know. People ask me, how do I know I'm getting a good natural health product? Well, look for the iSure symbol. Last thing, I mentioned before that perception when it comes to stress is really important, that people who perceive their stress as a challenge fare better on almost any measurement of health that you can come up with than those who perceive their stress as a threat. People that have a lot of stress but don't think stress is bad for them do better. And so I'm not saying to be Pollyanna or pretend everything's okay when it's not, but helping to look on the bright side is a practice that we can get into, not ignoring things that need to be addressed, but I love this quote here: being negative only makes a journey more difficult. You may be given a cactus, but you don't have to sit on it. Okay, and that is the information that I had time to. We're just a few minutes over. I was aiming for about 45 minutes, and this leaves us time for questions. I know that is where Dion takes over to read out our questions.
Thank you. Yeah, that was wonderful. So far, no questions have come in, so we'll give it maybe just a couple minutes to see if anyone pops in a question now. So please do if you have any questions, anyone. I was going to ask you, what is your definition of moderate exercise?
Oh, good question. So there's lots we could say about exercise. So I would say moderate exercise would be that typical prescription of 20 to 30 minutes, 5 times a week kind of thing, of say walking or walking at a brisk pace. But there are studies that suggest that specifically high intensity interval training is particularly good for brain cells and will help you grow new brain cells in about 3 months. And so a prescription for that would be, and what's, for example, done in the clinical trials is you do 3 minutes kind of of walking, or jogging. If you can't jog, then walk as much as you can. 3 minutes of exerting yourself until like you're working so hard you can't really talk, and then 3 minutes of a moderate pace. So 3 minutes of like a 8 to 9 out of 10 intensity, and then 3 minutes of maybe like a 6 out of 10 intensity. Repeat that 4 times. So 3 minutes hard, 3 minutes moderate. And that gives you all together, with a little warm up and cool down, about 30 minutes. And that particular prescription for that intense interval training has been shown to grow new brain cells in 3 months.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So we have a couple questions that have come in. I have to agree with this. The question or the statement is, I am baffled by the doorway forgetfulness theory. A great excuse that I will be using now. What is the scientific reasoning for this? And do you take bio-PQQ daily or for a certain amount of time?
Okay. So, you know what? I am not sure if they know the mechanism by which that happens, or I don't recall from when I said when I read the study. They absolutely have shown that it's a phenomenon, and it's now a well-established phenomenon, but I'm not sure if they understand exactly what or why that happens. But that's a good question. I'm gonna have to go back to those studies and read if they have figured out must have something to do with attention switching. But it's uncanny, right? Because when you go back to where you came from, it pops right back in your head. So there must be some, I don't know, maybe there's a protective effect to it. I don't know. And a bio-PQQ. So clinical trials have shown people taking it for, the clinical trials I've seen have been roughly 12 weeks in length. That's not to say you can't take it longer or on an ongoing basis. Oh, by the way, one thing I meant to mention, the PQQ, don't take it too late in the day. I would say taking it earlier in the day, because I find I made this mistake once and I couldn't sleep because it was quite energizing. So take that early in the morning. I personally will take it, I kind of go on and off, but certainly if I know I'm going to be getting into a project that I need all my neurons firing, I tend to take the bio-PQQ at that time. But yeah, clinical trials go typically for 12 weeks.
Thank you. And another question, is there a more favorable age to start the memory boost supplement?
No, I mean, it really depends on if you have any concerns around cognition, focus, memory, you can take it at any age. But it's also something that could conceivably be considered to be a good study aid because of its function for, say, increased blood flow to the brain, the acetyl-L-carnitine in particular, delivering fats to the mitochondria to help energize your brain cells and every other cell. It's something that can be taken, I would say, in younger individuals, you know, for periods of time where, like you said, you may be studying or need to focus your brain. And then for older individuals who have concerns around cognitive function, it's something that can be taken on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. It doesn't look like any more questions have come in. So I just really want to thank you and thank everyone else who has joined us here today, or if you're watching later. If you want to find out about our nutrition services, please visit our website at choicesmarkets.com. And from there, you can reach out to your in-store nutritionist and set up for an education session with one of our consultants. We have one in every store. And look for the email that you will receive shortly. That's going to be the survey, and we will again ask you for your mailing address, and that's so we can send you a coupon. Maybe you can buy some stuff to help with your memory or inflammation. So thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Dr. Kate.
Thanks, Dion. Take care. Thanks, everyone.